The late afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the grimy windows of Felix's cramped studio apartment, illuminating canvases that bore the weight of unfulfilled dreams. Paint tubes lay scattered across a makeshift table, their contents squeezed, out in desperate attempts to capture something beautiful enough to sell. Felix Romano wiped his paint-stained hands on his jeans and glanced at the stack of overdue bills threatening to topple from his desk. At 28, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that turned heads on the street, with dark curls that perpetually fell across his forehead and eyes the color of warm honey. Yet his bank account told a different story entirely. Another masterpiece destined for the storage closet, he muttered, examining his latest painting of the Brooklyn Bridge. The technique was flawless, the composition striking. But galleries weren't interested in pretty pictures anymore. They wanted concepts, statements, art that challenged society, or at least challenged their viewers' wallets. His phone buzzed with a text from Diego, his childhood friend who worked as a server at Le Petit Jardin, one of Manhattan's most romantic restaurants. Crazy busy tonight. Could use an extra pair of hands if you want to make some quick cash. Felix had helped Diego before during particularly hectic evenings, clearing tables and washing dishes in exchange for a decent meal and enough money to keep his electricity on. But tonight felt different. Tonight he knew she would be there. Vivienne Delacroix arrived at Le Petit Jardin every Tuesday at precisely 7:30, always requesting the corner table by the large window overlooking the garden courtyard. Felix had noticed her 3 weeks ago when he'd been helping Diego with inventory, and she had completely captivated him. Everything about her exuded elegance, from the way she gracefully removed her silk scarf to how she held her wine glass with practiced sophistication. Her auburn hair caught the restaurant's ambient lighting like spun copper, and when she smiled at the servers, Felix felt his heart perform acrobatics. She always dined alone, usually with a book propped beside her plate, occasionally glancing up to watch the other patrons with an expression of gentle amusement. Felix had learned from Diego that she was a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which explained her refined taste and the way she seemed to appreciate beauty in everything around her. During his brief glimpses of her, Felix had constructed an entire fantasy life where he was sophisticated enough to approach her table, witty enough to make her laugh, and successful enough to deserve her attention. "I have an idea," Felix announced. When Diego arrived to pick him up for work, completely insane, probably illegal, definitely stupid idea. Diego raised an eyebrow as he adjusted his server's uniform. "Those are usually your best ideas. What are you thinking?" "What if I didn't just help in the kitchen tonight? What if I actually served tables?" "Felix, you've never been a server. It spills soup on someone within the first 10 minutes. "Serious, I've watched you work dozens of times. I know the routine. Besides, I need to talk to her." "Her? Oh no, not the Tuesday night regular. Felix, that woman is completely out of your league. She probably spends more on wine in a week than you make in a month." Felix's jaw tightened with determination. "Maybe, but I'll never know unless I try. Come on, Diego. One night. If I mess up, I'll disappear back to the kitchen and never ask." Again, Diego stared at his friend for a long moment, recognizing the stubborn set of Felix's shoulders. This is going to end badly, probably, but what if it doesn't? An hour later, Felix stood in the restaurant's employee bathroom, adjusting a borrowed uniform that fit surprisingly well. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed his hair and practiced his server smile in the mirror. The restaurant hummed, with its usual evening energy, a symphony of clinking glasses, soft laughter, the gentle scrape of silverware against fine china. The dining room was bathed in warm, golden light from crystal chandeliers, and fresh flowers adorned every table. "Remember," Diego whispered as they walked toward the dining room, "you're covering section 3. Tables 12 through 16. Keep it simple. Don't try to be clever, and for the love of all that's holy, don't mention that you're an artist." Felix nodded, his palms sweating as he spotted Vivienne settling into her usual table. She wore a midnight blue dress that complemented her coloring perfectly, and she'd already opened a leather-bound book beside her water glass. This was it. His moment to make an impression that wasn't filtered through kitchen doors or stolen glances. He approached her table with what he hoped was confident grace, Oh, his legs felt like they might give out at any moment. "Good evening, miss. Welcome to Le Petit Jardin." Vivian looked up from her book, and Felix felt the full impact of her green eyes meeting his. There was intelligence there, and humor, and something that made him forget his carefully rehearsed lines. "Good evening," she replied, her voice carrying a slight French accent that made his name sound like music. "I don't believe we've met. Are you new here?" "Yes, it's my first night, actually." The truth slipped out before he could stop it. "I'm Felix Vivian." She extended her hand with old-world elegance, and when Felix shook it, he felt a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with the restaurant's lighting. First nights can be nerve-wracking. "How are you finding it so far?" "Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure," Felix admitted, surprised by his own honesty. "Rather like approaching a beautiful woman's table and hoping not to make a complete fool of myself." Vivian's laugh was like silver bells, genuine and delighted. "Well, you're off to a promising start. Though I should warn you, I'm a notoriously difficult customer." "Difficult how?" "Ask too many questions about the wine. I change my mind about appetizers, and I have strong opinions about proper bread service." Felix felt his nervousness melting away, replaced by the familiar thrill of interesting conversation. "Strong opinions about bread service? This sounds like a story." "Oh, it is. But first, shouldn't you be telling me about tonight's specials?" Reality crashed back over Felix like cold water. He was supposed to be working, not flirting, right? Of course. "Tonight we have—" He paused, realizing he had no idea what the specials were. Diego had been talking during his briefing, but Felix had been too distracted by nerves to listen properly. "Let me guess," Vivian said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "You were so focused on not being nervous that you forgot to memorize the specials. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been in similar situations? Tell you what, why don't you recommend something you personally would enjoy?" "I find personal recommendations much more interesting than rehearsed descriptions anyway." Felix felt a rush of gratitude for her kindness. "In that case, I'd recommend the coq au vin. It's comfort food elevated to an art form, and the chef here treats it like a love letter to French cuisine. Sold." "And for wine, the Burgundy. It's bold enough to stand up to the dish, but smooth enough to drink on its own." "Perfect. You know, Felix, for someone on his first night, you have excellent instincts." As Felix walked back to place her order, he felt like he was floating. The conversation had been effortless, natural, exactly what he'd dreamed it would be. Vivian had been warm and encouraging, treating his nervousness with gentle humor rather than impatience. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of stolen moments. Each time Felix returned to Vivian's table, whether to refill her wine or check on her meal, they fell into easy conversation. She asked about his background. He found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his life, painting himself as someone exploring different career paths, rather than a struggling artist waiting tables for grocery money. When the evening finally wound down and Vivian prepared to leave, she lingered at her table longer than usual. "Felix," she said as he brought her check, "I hope your first night was everything you hoped it would be." "It exceeded my wildest expectations," he replied, meaning every word. "Good, I'll see you next Tuesday then." As she walked away, Felix felt his heart hammering with possibility and terror in equal measure. He had a week to figure out how to maintain this elaborate charade, and absolutely no idea how he was going to pull it off. The week that followed their first encounter felt like the longest 7 days of Felix's life. He found himself unable to concentrate on his paintings, his mind constantly replaying every moment of their conversation. The way Vivian had laughed at his nervous jokes, how her eyes had sparkled with genuine interest when he spoke, the graceful way she had handled his obvious inexperience without making him feel foolish. He practiced carrying trays in his apartment until his neighbors complained about the noise, memorized the restaurant's entire menu, and even watched YouTube videos on proper wine service. Diego had been skeptical, but supportive, agreeing to help Felix maintain the charade for a few more weeks. "Just promise me you'll tell her the truth before this gets too complicated," he had warned. Women like Vivian don't appreciate being lied to, even if the lie comes from a good place. Tuesday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October, and Felix's hands shook as he adjusted his uniform tie. The restaurant was busier than usual. It was filled with couples celebrating anniversaries and business dinners that required extra attention. Felix had been assigned to Section 3 again, ostensibly to help with the overflow, but really so he could serve Vivian without raising suspicions among the other staff. She arrived at 7:30 sharp, wearing an emerald green dress that made her eyes look like polished jade. When she spotted Felix across the dining room, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. She offered a small wave that made his chest tighten with both joy and guilt. "Felix," she said warmly as he approached her table, "how was your first week? Did you survive the initiation?" "Barely," he replied, setting down her water glass with steady hands. "I learned that there's a significant difference between knowing how to carry a tray and actually carrying one while navigating a crowded dining room." "Battle scars?" she asked, noticing a small bandage on his finger. "Occupational hazard. Turns out wine glasses have very sharp edges when they break." Vivian winced sympathetically. The glamorous life of a server, imagine most people don't realize how physically demanding the job can be. As Felix took her order, he found himself relaxing into their conversation. Vivian had a gift for making people feel comfortable asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite small talk. She inquired about his background, and Felix carefully constructed a version of his life that wasn't entirely false, but wasn't completely honest either. He mentioned his love of art, describing it as a hobby rather than his primary passion, and spoke about enjoying variety in his work rather than admitting to his financial desperation. "You have an interesting perspective on things," Vivian observed as Felix refilled her wine glass. "Most people your age seem so focused on climbing a specific ladder, but you talk about work like you're collecting experiences rather than building a career?" "Maybe I haven't found my ladder yet," Felix replied, surprised by his own honesty. "Or maybe I'm not convinced that ladders are the only way to reach interesting places." Philosopher and a server, you continue to surprise me, Felix. Throughout the evening, their interactions grew longer and more personal. Vivian shared stories about her work at the museum, describing the thrill of discovering a previously unknown piece or the challenge of creating exhibitions that made art accessible to diverse audiences. Felix found himself genuinely fascinated by her passion, asking questions that went far beyond polite interest. "You light up when you talk about your work," he observed during one of his visits to her table. "It's beautiful to watch someone discuss something they truly love. Most people find my enthusiasm for dead artists and dusty paintings rather boring." Vivian admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Then most people are idiots," Felix said firmly. "Passion is never boring. It's one of the most attractive qualities a person can have." The compliment hung in the air between them, more intimate than anything Felix had intended to say. Vivian's cheeks flushed slightly. She looked down at her wine glass with a small smile that made Felix's heart race. As the weeks continued, their Tuesday evening encounters became the highlight of both their schedules. Felix had managed to convince the restaurant manager to put him on the schedule regularly, claiming he needed the steady income and enjoyed the work. The lie came easier now, layered upon all the other deceptions he was maintaining. Their conversations grew deeper and more personal with each meeting. Vivian told him about her childhood in Montreal, her decision to move to New York for graduate school, and her dreams of one day curating a major retrospective that would change how people viewed a particular artistic movement. Felix shared carefully edited versions of his own stories, talking about his love of creativity and his search for meaningful work without mentioning his actual artistic pursuits. "You have such thoughtful insights about art," Vivian commented one evening, after Felix had offered his opinion on a contemporary exhibition she was developing. "Have you ever considered working in a museum or gallery?" Felix's stomach clenched. "With guilt? I don't think I have the right background for that kind of work." Background can be developed. Natural instinct and genuine appreciation are much rarer qualities. The compliment should have thrilled him, but instead it deepened his shame about the elaborate fiction he was maintaining. He was falling for Vivian genuinely and completely. She was falling for a version of him that didn't really exist. The turning point came during their 6th Tuesday together. The restaurant was unusually quiet, and Felix found himself lingering. At Vivian's table, longer than usual, she had finished her meal but seemed reluctant to leave. Nursing a glass of dessert wine while they talked about books they had both read. "Felix," she said suddenly, her tone more serious than usual. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. This might sound presumptuous, but I get the feeling that you're not entirely happy here. Don't misunderstand me. You're wonderful at your job, but sometimes I catch you looking like you're somewhere else entirely." Felix felt his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk about art. For one thing, most people who are casually interested don't have the depth of knowledge you demonstrate. And there's something in your eyes sometimes, like you're seeing the world differently than the rest of us. Maybe I'm just observant. Or maybe you're an artist pretending to be a server." The words hit Felix like a physical blow. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't either confirm her suspicion or force him to lie more elaborately. "I don't know what you mean," he said finally, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. Vivian studied his face for a long moment. Felix could see the exact moment when disappointment replaced curiosity in her expression. She had given him an opportunity to be honest, and he had chosen to maintain his deception instead. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice polite but noticeably cooler. "I must be imagining things." The rest of their interaction was stilted and formal. Vivian paid her check quickly and left without her usual warm goodbye. And Felix knew he had damaged something precious and possibly irreparable. As he watched her walk away, Diego appeared at his elbow. "What happened? You look like someone?" "Just told you your dog died." "I think I just lost her," Felix said quietly. "She knows something isn't right, and instead of being honest, I lied to her face. So tell her the truth next week." "What if she doesn't come back?" Diego placed a sympathetic hand on Felix's shoulder. "Then you'll know that the lie was more important to you than she was." The words stung because they contained a grain of truth that Felix didn't want to examine too closely. He had started this charade to get close to Vivian, but somewhere along the way it had become more important to maintain the fiction than to build something real. That night, Felix couldn't sleep. He paced his small apartment, alternately planning elaborate confessions and convincing himself that Vivian would never speak to him again once she learned the truth. He had fallen in love with a woman who didn't really know him, and he had no idea how to bridge the gap between who he pretended to be and who he actually was. Tuesday arrived gray and drizzling, matching Felix's mood perfectly. He arrived at work early, hoping to catch Diego before the evening shift began. "I'm going to tell her," he announced. "Tonight, after her meal, I'm going to explain everything." "Good," Diego replied. "It's about time. What if she hates me?" "She might, but she definitely will if you keep lying to her." Felix nodded, knowing his friend was right but terrified of the conversation ahead. At 7:30 he watched the restaurant entrance with nervous anticipation, but 7:45 came and went with no sign of Vivian. By 8 o'clock, Felix began to worry that she had decided not to come back at all. Just as he was beginning to panic, she walked through the door, but everything about her demeanor was different. She moved with purpose rather than her usual graceful leisure. And when the hostess gestured toward her regular table, Vivian shook her head and requested a different seat across the dining room. Felix watched in dismay as another server approached. Her table, taking her order with professional efficiency, she had deliberately chosen to sit outside his section, sending a clear message that their connection, whatever it had been, was over. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had lost her through his own cowardice and deception, and there might not be another chance to make things right. Felix spent the following week in a state of miserable limbo, playing every conversation he'd had with Vivian and torturing himself with different scenarios where he had been brave enough to tell the truth. His paintings, usually his refuge during difficult times, felt hollow and meaningless. He started 3 different canvases and abandoned them all, unable to focus on anything except the memory of disappointment in Vivian's eyes. Diego tried to be supportive, but even his patience was wearing thin. "You're making yourself sick over this," he said as they sat in Felix's apartment the following Monday evening. "Either do something about it or accept that it's over and move on. What can I do? She won't even let me serve her table anymore. So don't approach her as a server. Be yourself for once. The suggestion was both terrifying and liberating. Felix had become so invested in maintaining his fictional identity that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be genuine. But the thought of approaching Vivian as himself, without the safety net of his server persona, felt like stepping off a cliff. Tuesday evening found Felix stationed at the restaurant's bar, nursing a single beer and watching Vivian from across the room. She looked beautiful as always, but there was a tension in her posture that hadn't been there before. She ate quickly and efficiently, without her usual leisurely appreciation of the food and atmosphere. When she paid her check and prepared to leave, Felix made a decision that surprised even himself. He followed her outside. "Vivian, wait." She turned at the sound of his voice, and Felix saw a flash of something, surprise or perhaps annoyance, cross her features. "Felix, I didn't realize you were working tonight." "I wasn't. I mean, I am, but not as a server. I was just—" He took a deep breath, knowing this was his only chance. "I need to tell you something. The truth this time. The truth." Her voice was carefully neutral, but Felix caught the slight emphasis on the word that confirmed his suspicions about what she had already figured out. "I'm not really a server. I mean, I have been for the past few weeks, but only because I wanted to meet you. My real job, my actual life, is completely different." Vivian's expression shifted from polite confusion to genuine surprise, then quickly to something that looked dangerously close to anger. "I'm sorry, what? I'm an artist? A painter? I've been struggling to make ends meet, and I was helping my friend Diego in the restaurant when I first saw you. I became completely infatuated, and I convinced him to let me pose as a server so I could get close enough to talk to you." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Felix watched Vivian's face cycle through a range of emotions: shock, hurt, anger, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "You've been lying to me this entire time?" Her voice was quiet, but Felix could hear the hurt underneath the calm tone. "Yes. No, not entirely. Everything I told you about myself was true, just not complete. I really do love art. I really am looking for meaningful work. I really did enjoy our conversations more than I've ever enjoyed talking to anyone. But you lied about who you are, about your job, about your entire reason for being there." Composure was beginning to crack, and Felix could see the depth of her hurt and betrayal. "Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? I thought we had a connection, something real, but apparently I was just part of some elaborate game to you." "Right. Wasn't a game," Felix said desperately. "It started as a crazy plan to meet you, but it became something much more important than that. I fell in love with you, Vivian. Not with the idea of you, not with the fantasy I had built up, but with the real person who talked to me about art and books and dreams. But I don't know the real you, do I?" she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I fell for a fiction, character you created specifically to manipulate me. It's not fair. Yes, I lied about my job, but everything else was real. My feelings for you are real. How can I trust anything you say now? If you could lie about something this fundamental, what else have you been dishonest about?" Felix felt tears burning behind his eyes as he watched the woman he loved pull away from him emotionally and physically. She was backing toward the street, her hand already raised to hail a taxi. "Please, just give me a chance to show you who I really am. Come to my studio, see my work. Let me prove that the person you connected with is real, even if the circumstances weren't entirely honest." "I can't," Vivian said, shaking her head. "I can't trust my judgment anymore. I thought I was a good judge of character, but apparently I'm naive enough to fall for someone who was literally playing a role." Taxi pulled up to the curb, and Vivian moved toward it. Felix felt panic rising in his chest as he realized she was really leaving, possibly forever. "Vivian, please? I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you, but what we had together was real. Don't let my stupid mistake destroy something that could be beautiful." She paused with her hand on the taxi door, turning back to look at him one last time. "The problem, Felix, is that I don't know what was real and what was performance. And I don't know if you do either." The taxi door slammed shut, and Felix watched helplessly as it disappeared into the Manhattan traffic, taking with it the most important thing that had ever happened to him. The next few days passed in a blur of self-recrimination and desperate planning. Felix knew he had one chance to prove to Vivian that his feelings had been genuine, but he had no idea how to reach her or what he could possibly say that would undo the damage he had caused. The answer came from an unexpected source. While researching Vivian online, trying to find some way to contact her, Felix discovered that she was curating a new exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art titled Hidden Truths: Art and Identity in Contemporary Culture. The irony wasn't lost on him, but it also sparked an idea so audacious that it made his previous server masquerade look like a minor deception. Felix spent the next 2 weeks creating a painting unlike anything he had ever attempted before. It was a self-portrait, but not in any traditional sense. Instead, he painted himself in layers, showing the struggling artist, the nervous server, the man in love, and the scared boy who had convinced himself that he wasn't good enough to approach. The woman of his dreams, honestly? The technique was complex, using transparent glazes that revealed different aspects of the image depending on the viewing angle and lighting. When it was finished, Felix carefully packaged the painting and delivered it to the museum, along with a letter addressed to Vivian. In the letter, he explained everything: his financial struggles, his initial infatuation, his growing love for her, and his deep regret at having started their relationship with deception. He asked for nothing except the chance to show her who he really was, layers and flaws and all. 3 days later, Felix's phone rang. "Your painting is beautiful." Vivian's voice was soft, thoughtful, and heartbreaking. "It's honest," Felix replied, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it through the phone. "Maybe for the first time in my life, it's completely honest. I can see that. I can also see the person I fell in love with in those layers. The man who made me laugh, who listened to my stories about work with genuine interest, who saw beauty in unexpected places. That person is real, Vivian. He was real then, and he's real now. The only thing that was fake was the uniform." There was a long pause, and Felix held his breath, afraid to hope. "I want to see your studio," she said finally. "I want to see the rest of your work, the life you were too afraid to show me." "You sure?" "No, but I'm willing to try." Felix's studio had never looked smaller or more chaotic than it did the afternoon. Vivian knocked on his door. Canvases covered every available surface, some finished, some abandoned, all bearing witness to his passion and struggle as an artist. He had spent hours trying to organize the space, but ultimately decided that pretending to be more put together than he actually was would be repeating his original mistake. "It's not much," he said as he let her in, suddenly seeing the cramped space through her eyes. "It's perfect," Vivian replied, already moving toward a large canvas that depicted the Brooklyn Bridge in moody blues and grays. "This is extraordinary, Felix. Why didn't you tell me you could paint like this?" "Because I was afraid you'd think I was just another struggling artist looking for a wealthy patron," he admitted. "Because I was ashamed of how little success I'd had despite years of work. Because I convinced myself that Felix the server was more interesting than Felix the painter." Vivian moved through the studio slowly, examining each piece with the trained eye of a professional curator. Felix watched her face, trying to read her reactions, terrified that she would find his work amateurish or derivative. "You have a distinctive voice," she said finally. "Raw, emotional, but technically sophisticated. These paintings tell stories. They're my stories. It's the real ones this time." She turned to face him, and Felix saw something in her expression that gave him hope. "Why did you think you had to lie to get my attention? Do you really think I'm so shallow that I would only be interested in someone with a traditional job?" "No, that's not what I thought at all. I thought you were so far out of my league that I needed some kind of edge, some way to seem more interesting, or stable than I actually am. Felix, I work in the art world. I'm surrounded by creative people who struggle financially but create beautiful things. That's not a liability in my eyes. It's admirable." The words hit Felix like a revelation. He had been so focused on his own insecurities that he had never considered that Vivian might actually appreciate his artistic passion rather than see it as a weakness. "I'm an idiot," he said quietly. "Yes, you are. But you're also talented. and kind and brave enough to create something beautiful out of your mistakes. She gestured toward the self-portrait he had sent to the museum. I'd like to include this piece in my exhibition, if you're willing. Felix stared at her in amazement. You want to display my work in the Met? I want to display your honesty in the Met. This painting embodies everything the exhibition is trying to explore about identity and authenticity in contemporary culture. What about us? Felix asked, afraid to assume anything. Is there still an us to talk about? Vivian was quiet for a long moment, studying the painting that had brought them back together. I don't know yet. You hurt me, Felix. You made me question my own judgment and feel foolish for believing in something that wasn't entirely real? I understand. But, she continued, turning to meet his eyes, I also understand why you did it. Fear makes people do complicated things, and your fear came from caring about me, not from wanting to hurt me. So where does that leave us? Leaves us starting over. No more lies. No more pretending to be someone you're not. If we're going to try this, it has to be built on who we actually are, not who we think the other person wants us to be. Felix felt a rush of gratitude so intense, it was almost overwhelming. I can do that. I want to do that. Good, because Felix the artist is much more interesting than Felix the server ever was. 3 months later, Felix stood in the Metropolitan, a museum of art surrounded by some of the most important people in the New York art world, watching as visitors examined his self-portrait with intense curiosity and appreciation. The exhibition had been a tremendous success, and his piece had garnered particular attention from critics and collectors alike. But the most important viewer was standing beside him, her hand intertwined with his as they watched people discover his work. Any regrets? Vivian asked quietly. About the lying? Absolutely. About everything that came after? Not a single one. Good answer. She squeezed his hand and smiled up at him. I have to admit I sometimes miss that nervous server who used to spill things when he got flustered. He's still here, Felix replied, leaning down to kiss her softly, just without the uniform. As they walked through the gallery together, Felix marveled at how different his life had become since that first terrifying night when he had approached Vivian's table with shaking hands and a fabricated identity. The success of the exhibition had led to representation by a prestigious gallery, and for the first time in his adult life, Felix could envision a future where his art could support him financially, as well as emotionally. But more importantly, he had learned that love built on honesty, even difficult honesty, was infinitely more valuable than affection built on comfortable lies. Vivian knew him now in all his complexity, his struggles and dreams and fears, and she loved him not despite these things, but because of them. Thank you, he said as they paused in front of his painting. For forgiving you? For seeing through my act before I convinced myself it was real. Vivian looked up at him with eyes full of warmth and mischief. Well, you were a terrible server anyway. I was doing the restaurant a favor. Felix laughed, pulling her closer as they continued through the gallery. No longer hiding behind masks or costumes, just two people who had found each other through art, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable. The masquerade was over, but the love story was just beginning.